The movie opens with a fisherman named Syracuse trawling his boat off the coast of Ireland. He hasn't had a good catch in weeks, and today seems no different. After hours at sea, he pulls in his net only to find a woman tangled inside. Shocked, Syracuse notices that she is still alive, so he quickly frees her and performs CPR. The woman gasps for breath and regains consciousness. As she struggles to speak, she begs Syracuse not to take her to the hospital, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of being around a lot of people. When she even tries to jump back into the sea, Syracuse stops her, promising instead to take her somewhere secluded. He brings her to his late mother's caravan, a remote place where no one will find her. He explains that his mother was a recluse, so the location is largely unknown. After chatting briefly, Syracuse leaves the mysterious woman there to attend to some urgent matters. Later, he picks up his daughter, Annie, who suffers from kidney failure, from his ex-wife Maura's house, and takes Annie to a mobile clinic for her dialysis. During the treatment, Annie asks him to tell her a story, so he recounts the earlier events with the woman, disguising it as a fairy tale. Intrigued by the tale, Annie wonders if the woman could be a selkie, a mythical creature from Irish folklore, but Syracuse is unfamiliar with the term. Annie explains that selkies are magical seal women who can transform and live on land for a time before returning to the sea. Although intrigued, Syracuse doesn't delve deeper into the topic, and the dialysis session soon ends. The next day, Syracuse returns to the caravan and finds the woman singing by a nearby stream. He prepares to head out fishing again, and the woman insists on joining him, even though Syracuse believes it's unlucky to have a woman on a boat. Despite his superstition, he allows her to come along. As they sail, he asks her about the song she was singing, but she cannot recall where she first heard it. When he asks for her name, the woman tells him to call her Andine, a French word meaning a girl who came from the water. Their fishing trip proves surprisingly fruitful. Initially, the traps are empty, but as Andine begins to sing, Syracuse's luck changes. He catches a lobster and then many more. Convinced that her song brings him luck, Syracuse marvels at how everything she touches seems magical. The next day, Syracuse picks Annie up from school, and she challenges him to a race home in her motorized wheelchair. Along the way, she insists he continue the story from the previous day, prompting him to describe the woman's singing and how it seemed to bring good fortune. Annie, growing suspicious, listens intently and wonders if the story could be real. Later, Syracuse heads to the caravan, unaware that Annie has followed him. Curious, she spies on him and confirms her suspicions when she sees Andine inside. Meanwhile, inside the caravan, Syracuse asks Andine how long she plans to stay, to which she replies that it depends on him. Without hesitation, Syracuse tells her she can stay as long as she wants. Andine smiles, appreciating his kindness. After confirming the truth behind her father's story, Annie visits the library to research selkies. Meanwhile, Syracuse goes to a church to confess to the local priest. He talks about his struggles with alcoholism and reveals that he pulled a mysterious woman from the sea during a fishing trip. The priest is skeptical about the woman's story, but encourages Syracuse to keep him informed. The next day, Annie visits the caravan while her father is working and meets Andine. The two chat, and Annie eagerly asks questions about selkie lore, including whether Andine has a seal coat. Andine, however, is unfamiliar with these terms. Annie explains that in the legends, a selkie loses her coat when she comes on land and cannot return to the sea until she finds it. If a selkie buries her coat, she can stay on land for 7 years. Andine enjoys Annie's stories and kisses her cheek before telling her to go home. Later that day, Andine joins Syracuse for another fishing trip. She steers the boat, but when another ship passes by, she hides, still fearful of being seen. Once they're far enough, she begins to sing again, and as before, Syracuse's nets fill with an unusually large catch, this time with salmon, which typically require much finer nets. Syracuse is astonished by his good fortune, but the moment is interrupted when a fisheries board patrol boat arrives. The officers board his boat and inspect his catch, suspicious of the large amount of salmon. While investigating, they discover Andine hiding below deck. Syracuse points out that having a woman on board might be unusual, but is certainly not illegal. The officers, although skeptical, let him go. He is right, and the officers are forced to leave without taking any action. Following the close call, Syracuse and Andine head to the harbor together, unaware that a mysterious man is watching them closely. After selling their catch, Andine accompanies Syracuse into town to buy some new clothes. While shopping, they bump into Annie, who reveals that she has already met Andine. Syracuse is momentarily surprised but allows Annie to join them, and they all shop together. Over the next few days, Andine grows close to Annie. One afternoon, she offers to teach the little girl how to swim. They head to a nearby dock, where Andine gently helps Annie float in the water. While they play near the bank, Andine stumbles upon something underwater and pulls out a large jute sack tangled in seaweed. Annie, on the other hand, believes it's her seal coat and encourages Andine to bury it so she can stay with them for 7 years. The scene shifts to Andine and Annie burying the jute sack in an abandoned greenhouse near the caravan. Andine makes Annie promise to keep this a secret. That evening, Syracuse drops Annie back at her mother's house and returns to the caravan, where he and Andine have a heart-to-heart conversation. Syracuse opens up about his past, revealing that both he and his ex-wife, Maura, were alcoholics. He stopped drinking after one night when he found Annie unconscious while Maura was passed out drunk. Realizing that at least one of them needed to be sober for Annie's safety, he gave up alcohol. However, this decision also ended their marriage. Because Irish law doesn't typically grant custody to fishermen, who are often away from home, Annie remained with Maura. Andine is moved by his story and comforts him. The next day, Syracuse, feeling uneasy about keeping secrets, visits the local church to confess. He tells the priest that Andine brings him luck, but he fears something is about to happen. Whether wonderful or terrible, he doesn't know. After the confession, Syracuse is approached outside the church by the same mysterious man who had been watching Andine at the harbor. The man inquires about her, but Syracuse brushes him off and leaves. Later, Syracuse takes Annie to her dialysis appointment, where she reveals that she had a nightmare and feels frightened. Syracuse reassures her, holding her hand throughout the treatment to comfort her. Afterward, when they return home, Maura is nowhere to be found, so they head into town to look for her. Meanwhile, the mysterious man has tracked down Syracuse's caravan and begins searching the property. Andine spots him in time and sneaks out the back, hiding in the greenhouse. Elsewhere, Syracuse finds Maura and her boyfriend, Alex, at a pub. They refuse to give him the house keys and insist that Annie will be fine staying with them. Syracuse is hesitant but relents after Annie reassures him. He returns to the caravan, only to find it ransacked. Alarmed, he searches the area, calling out for Andine. He eventually finds her by a stream, where she explains that the mysterious man came looking for her. When Syracuse asks who he is, Andine reveals that the man is her Selkie husband. Though skeptical, Syracuse remembers Annie telling him that Selkies can grant one wish. He suggests that Andine wish for the man to leave, but Andine refuses and instead wishes for Annie's good health. Meanwhile, the mysterious man is driving back into town. At the same time, a drunk Maura is also driving home with Alex and Annie in the back seat. Due to Maura's recklessness, the two vehicles collide and Alex is killed instantly. Fortunately, Annie, who had her seatbelt on, escapes with minor injuries. Syracuse and Andine soon learn of the accident and rush to the hospital. Annie wakes up hours later, and the doctor pulls Syracuse aside with unexpected news. He reveals that Alex was a registered organ donor, and his kidneys are a match for Annie. With Alex now deceased, they are able to perform a transplant that saves Annie's life. Later, while Syracuse sits by his daughter's side in the post-operation room, Andine is praying outside in the hallway. As she paces, she passes by the mysterious man, who was brought to the hospital after suffering injuries in the accident. He yells at her in a foreign language, but she shouts back, telling him to go home. Days later, Alex's funeral is held, and an injured Maura scatters his ashes into the sea. Syracuse sympathizes with his ex-wife, feeling guilty over what happened, but Maura assures him that he isn't to blame. She then asks him to take Annie home, as she cannot handle taking care of her while she recovers. Afterward, they head to Alex's wake at the pub, where Maura manipulates Syracuse into drinking. Several glasses later, she urges him to get rid of Andine, claiming that Andine brought him good luck at first, but now it's time for the bad part. Syracuse, who had begun to regain hope in life with Andine's arrival, starts to fear the worst after the accident that almost took his daughter's life. That evening, a heavily intoxicated Syracuse returns to his boat, where Andine has been hiding from the mysterious man. Drunk and emotional, he decides to send her away. He drags her out onto the deck and questions her about her husband. Andine tries to explain that she isn't married, but Syracuse refuses to listen. Convinced that she belongs at sea, he takes her toward a lighthouse near the dock. Hurt by his cruel words, Andine remains silent and accepts his decision. Shortly after, Syracuse leaves alone, believing that ending their relationship will prevent further tragedy. The next day, the local priest finds Syracuse hungover, slumped under a tree. When asked if everything is all right, Syracuse launches into a long rant about how miserable his life is. The priest advises him that while it's easy to succumb to misery, happiness requires effort. Struck by the truth of this, Syracuse realizes the mistakes he's made. In the next scene, he picks up Annie from the hospital and takes her home. When she asks about Andine, Syracuse lies, telling her that she went back to the sea for some personal reasons. Though upset, Annie is convinced that Andine will return, as she hasn't taken Herb's seal coat with her. The following day, while Annie is watching TV, Syracuse hears a song playing that sounds familiar. He discovers that the song comes from an Icelandic band, not from a mystical underwater realm as he once believed. This leads him to the conclusion that Andine is human, not a mythical Selkie. Determined to find the truth, Syracuse tells Annie to stay home and heads to the lighthouse. Upon arriving, he finds Andine on the shore. She sarcastically remarks that she's joined the seals basking in the sun. When she asks what brought him back, Syracuse explains that he heard her song on TV. Realizing he wants the truth, Andine finally reveals her past. She confesses that she was a drug mule from Romania. On the day Syracuse found her, she had been on a boat smuggling illegal substances when the Coast Guard caught them. The mysterious man, Vladik, was her handler, and he forced her to flee with their supply as he couldn't swim. Unable to reach land, Andine discarded the drugs and let herself sink into the sea, where she was coincidentally caught in Syracuse's net. Shocked by her story, Syracuse feels pity for her and brings her back to his home. However, upon arriving, they are confronted by Vladik, who has taken Annie hostage. He forces the little girl to reveal that Andine had recently found Herb's seal coat, unaware that it was actually the jute sack filled with drugs. Now aware that Andine still has the bag, Vladik threatens to harm Annie if she doesn't hand it over. Panicked, Andine takes him to the greenhouse, but they discover the sack is missing. Fearing for their lives, Annie admits that she hid the sack in a lobster trap on her father's boat. The scene shifts to the boat, where Vladik retrieves the lobster cage while holding everyone at gunpoint. At that moment, Andine remembers that Vladik can't swim and comes up with a plan. She yanks on the rope, causing Vladik to lose his balance and fall overboard. He struggles in the water, pleading for help, but no one comes to his aid. Ultimately, Vladik drowns in the ocean. The movie ends with Syracuse and Andine getting married on the same boat where they first met, and they live happily ever after. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.